Okay, excellent. We'll get underway then. If teams are able to turn cameras on, particularly while they're speaking, that'd be great. But if that's not possible for tech reasons, that is understandable. With that in mind, we will hear from first prop.
Hi, can I check that I'm visible and audible?
Yeah, you're all good.
Thank you. I would prefer verbal POIs, please. The advent of artificial intelligence has placed unlimited wisdom and information at humanity's fingertips, from being able to generate essays to creating art and playing video games. It is a pity that the one thing stopping us from unlocking AI's full potential is companies' ability to fund and research these projects. We solve this when we concentrate resources in one single company, enabling better innovation and a higher quality of products. Propose. What is our stance? We prefer a world with a single major company developing large AI models and running major training runs. This looks like the merging of all AI companies to create a specific AI model, such as merging OpenAI and DeepMind, etc. Secondly, to be clear, anti-competitive behavior does not always translate into negative impacts on quality and price for consumers. Mergers, for instance, reduce competition, but often translate into cost savings and lower prices for consumers. Thus, Op needs to prove that market share is a direct measure of quality in AI. Thirdly, this debate is not about the development of doomsday AI. On either side of the house, the development of harmful AI hurts the reputation of companies themselves. This is why OpenAI refused to continue developing QStar when it began to show some forms of risks. With setup out of the way, first argument in this debate on why large corporations have a higher ability to raise the quality of these products. On our side, all the resources, knowledge, and manpower are concentrated in one firm. Why is this concentration necessary? Two reasons. First, the development of AI requires a huge volume of data. If we were to simplify the process, it looks a little like this. First, the firms need to obtain a large and diverse volume of data for online. Secondly, they need a lot of people to label this huge amount of data and sort the data for the AI. Finally, they need time for AI to learn the patterns in the data in each variation. The more data you have, the better the machine becomes. Think about search engines. The reason why Google is the most widely used search engine now is because they managed to get more people onto the platform and use the data to train the search engine to give more refined results. Similarly, this affects AI as well. Secondly, one single major company is also far more likely to invest their resources into riskier domains that can nevertheless be incredibly beneficial for consumers. This is because only they have the capital required to firstly, invest in these nascent domains. Note that the barrier of entry to AI is incredibly high because this is a very new nascent field, and knowledge in this area compared to other traditional industries like pharma or hospitality is incredibly limited. But secondly, companies don't just need to prove they have the capital to invest in new developments, they also need to guarantee that they have more than sufficient capital left to cushion the impact of failed endeavors. It is no surprise that OpenAI, the most successful and widely used AI model today, was funded by Microsoft, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, with hundreds of billions of dollars to invest and cushion their potential failed endeavors, and also many other areas to attract more funding. Secondly, we also uniquely increase ability for cross-subsidization, because on our side, when we have one big corporation developing AI as a whole, that means they can use different AI technologies to supplement each other to boost the quality. And this is mutually exclusive, because on opposition, AI companies on their side compete and are unlikely to collaborate in case they release trade secrets or classified technology, etc. This means we have a higher chance of cross-subsidization. But on our side, for instance, DALL-E and ChatGPT can be integrated. AlphaGo, which uses logic into mathematic models, can be integrated with, for instance, ChatGPT as well. This is incredibly beneficial because this means consumers are offered a wider range of products that function better. The upshot of this analysis is that we ensure a better quality and larger variety of AI services. The impact is that we get greater innovation on our side because firms are more willing to take this risk. And secondly, we have a higher quality of products because, first of all, firms can refine this AI technology at a faster rate using more data, which means that it's also safer for use for many, many consumers. Second argument then on why large corporations have better have better incentives on our side of the house. Why is it that AI products on our side will be affordable? There are a few reasons why this will be true. Firstly, nascent technology is a nascent technology that is not a necessity now. Yes, ChatGPT may be convenient, DALL-E may be convenient, but you can always just use Google and so many other things to replace using AI right now. For instance, you commission people to paint for you, etc. This means that this major firm on our side will still need to attract people onto this platform to push them away from conventional forms of life and into this new way of life of using AI to supplement their daily life. This means they have to lower price to make it seem like a convenient option for the vast majority of consumers out there. Secondly, the cheaper your technology, the more consumers you have. The more consumers you have, the more data you have, and therefore the better quality, first of all, of product, and secondly, the lower cost of product. Because on our side, with more data accessible, you have to spend less money buying more data from other firms, which might have access to these data points. You have your own data to work with, which means you lower the costs for firms to operate as well. So it is fully in the incentives of firms on our side, of the firm on our side, to lower the price of purchasing and accessing these services because it's completely beneficial for them economically to do so. On their side of the house, we recognize there might be competition, but we think this is incredibly harmful for AI and for consumers as a whole. Because on their side of the house, companies are forced to compete neck to neck to gain a first mover advantage. Why is it that gaining a first mover advantage on their side is likely to be the main focus of these companies? There are three reasons why this will be likely. Firstly, pushing out products first means that companies are able to obtain patents for their technology to protect all the billions of dollars they've invested and the billions of dollars in profit they can obtain in the decades to come. Secondly, it's important to gain consumer loyalty because people don't tend to transition away from the first product that they pick up. There's a reason why many of us right now still use iPhones because our parents picked up their iPhones first, for example, because of the fact of convenience and because of consumer familiarity. Companies that launch a new product first also secures the biggest wave of new consumers because of media attention. Because launching a new product that has never been seen before is the most attention capturing thing that news organizations can hop on. It's a curious marvel that might potentially change your life. It's something never anyone else has ever thought of. There's a reason why iPhone, when it was launched, became more than just the first smartphone model in the world. iPhone now is a way of life that the media and pop culture has spun this narrative around because of how it was the first thing that captured their attention. The upshot is that companies are pressured and forced to push out products at unhealthy and risky rates. This looks like the biggest shareholders of a company threatening to withdraw their funding if a company doesn't speed up the process. This looks like management threatening to fire their workers if they don't progress at unreasonably fast rates. Pushing out unethical and dangerous AI products that allows for deepfake, for instance, or AI that displays pornography is the worst manifestations of these narratives. We know that it is an extreme example, but notably, even on the milder spectrum, it's incredibly harmful. This looks like firms not checking, and if they're uncertain about the safety of an AI, choosing not to check and not to review this process because of the fact that they might lose out on billions of profit in both the short term and in the long term, leading to firm bankruptcy. The comparative is far better because on our side, large companies don't have this pressure. The largest existential threat that they face is not losing out to competition, but rather government crackdown and regulation. Because every government in the world will focus on regulating this one company that the people are scared of and that people use. At the end of the speech, here's a point of weighing. Note the incentive of firms to innovate and be safe is balanced on both sides of the house, as I've proven. Ability differentiates both sides. On our side, firms have a greater ability to fulfill these benevolent incentives that we think they're likely to have. It's for this reason that we're very proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much for that speech. And we'll now hear from the first opposition speaker.
Okay, great. Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, you're all good.
All right. Sorry, give me a moment to set up a timer. Okay, before I begin, I want to clarify, take verbal POIs. I'm going to be running two arguments in today's speech. first about monopolization, and a second regarding innovation will be a direct flip towards the proposition case. But before that, a couple pieces of clarification and refutation. First of all, I have 3 pieces of clarification. One, what is distinctly different about AI as opposed to any other product then? The distinction is as follows. This technology is relatively new. That means there's going to be a lot of media attention and scrutiny on a topic. This is a direct flip towards what they gave us in terms of mechanization. We tell you that this means that you're unlikely to push out a dangerous AI, because insofar as the consumers disapprove of it, you're going to have your competition overrun you, and your competitors will outcompete you. That means that AI companies still have an incentive to keep checks and balances within their AI insofar that they have competition. Second of all, what does the status quo look like in the current world? I think it looks like 2 things. First of all, there's many regulations on companies such as antitrust laws, right? But second of all, there's going to be a lot of companies. This looks like the 5,000 different companies that have like language models such as ChatGPT, right? That means there's going to be competition to see who makes the best technology. Or I'm going to be expanding on the impacts of this later. Thirdly, I want to clarify what our stance is in this debate. We can support large companies, and our stance is literally anything that's not like a single company that proposition has to support on their side of the world. Okay, after that, I want to move on to some refutation. What do they say? They say you have more capital, so you're able to make better products faster, and you're willing to take on more riskier capital. The crucial difference between AI and other technology is that the cost is comparatively smaller. E.g., a new investment of technology for Apple would require mining fields, factories, and many shipments and samples. This doesn't exist with AI. If you already have a team of programmers, then it's relatively easy to pursue risky endeavors. There's a high barrier of entry and skill initially, and it is easy to invest in a new project once you already have a company. But second of all, why is our side significantly better for cost? And this is a direct flip. 2 reasons. First of all, having a single corporation for a product that will become more and more necessary with time, like AI, means that you can peg the price for whatever they choose, right? Don't let them dismiss competition. Competition is often the only thing that controls price gouging. But second of all, and because Prop never disputes the greedy profit incentive that corporations is likely to have, we see that it's far likelier for corporations to overcharge and charge as low as possible. Okay, after that, I want to move on to our first point, which is on monopolization. The claim at this point is simple. Vital technology will be controlled by one single entity. This grants malicious actors a lot of power. There are 2 cases which can happen on proposition side of the house. Case 1, the company controls all of the technology. Why is it hard for governments to regulate companies then? It's because on their side, it's hard for governments to impose regulations and scrutiny because the company has just so much power. This happens because, first of all, they have political soft power. Politicians want to please them because they can provide massive funding and support since they're such a big company, right? They're integral to the economy. But these companies also have large lobbying power. It means that they can directly influence politics as a whole. Second of all, this means that they're integral to the economy, and that's really important. This looks like, for example, Samsung in South Korea, which is a massive conglomerate and holds a huge share of South Korea's GDP. They have a soft power within that and can directly influence the economy within that. Why do companies have an incentive to do this then? Companies are profit-driven entities focused on maximizing profit. We already told you why they never disagree with this. They will do any means necessary in order to achieve this, which includes skirmishing past laws preventing them. E.g., this looks like why Amazon has a legal department in charge of finding loopholes in the first place, right? Additionally, it's harder for consumers to hold these companies accountable because in the status quo, the only metric of checks and balances for a company's profit incentive is consumer decision. You can't boycott or take action against a company if they have all the essential services, especially since we're shifting into a time of AI when AI is converted into many technologies. This is principally bad because it means that companies won't change bad behavior even at the expense of ethics. This is why Apple can violate human rights, have human rights violations, and they can force children in the Congo to mine cobalt for chips. In these cases, it looks like exploitations of employees and programmers and much, much worse. But even being charitable and saying somehow the governments can control them, that's still even worse because that brings me on to our second case, which is the government controls these AI companies. When one AI company becomes very, very powerful, the domestic government has a massive incentive to co-opt this company in their favor and do deals with it for their own incentive. This leads to many things. E.g., this looks like trading information for lower import taxes, etc., on a global stage. This company has a lot of information around the world as time progresses, people become incredibly reliant on this AI. This means one specific country's government has an unilateral information being able to provide it to them through this AI. This gives them a huge advantage both in politics, but also in military situations, with one country literally knows everything about another country. What kind of information is likely to be given then? If there's two types of information that's likely to be given. First of all, personal information of people within the country, but also second of all, confidential information. Note this is made even worse in the status quo because AI can interpret information. So right now on Google can only give you information that you feed to it, but AI has the power to interpret this type of information and make extrapolations, which are so worse. Why is this so bad then? It's bad on 3 levels. First of all, it's a breach of national security. Note this is incredibly unique because AI's scope of influence is massive and an ability to seek into different parts of a program are unique to browsers such as engines such as Google. Second of all, it allows for one country to control the globe. I think this is a really bad in of itself because it gives us massive coercion power.
Point of information.
But last of all, it allows companies to get away with violations of law and morality. And know the strategic implication of this last impact. This is upstream to any about innovation because insofar as there is a moral harm being done, we shouldn't do something like this. E.g., this looks like why we wouldn't kill one person to save 5 other people, even if it does increase utility, because the principal argument stands on top of the ground. But we're going to go even further than flipping the proposition's point about innovation. This brings me on to our second point about innovation, and it's a direct flip to the proposition case. The claim here is simple. Companies have no incentive to innovate. How do companies actually work? Companies want to milk the maximum profit of each innovation. E.g., with Apple, it only sells one new model of the same 5 products every year, where it has hundreds of patents and new innovations, technologies, just rise in a back seller. But before I move on, take the point.
Regardless of how much funds a politician has from lobbying, it is ultimately the number of votes at the end of the day that determines their power. If it's AI such a big threat, why won't voters vote against big AI?
We already told you this mechanization in our first point, right? Voters are unable to vote against this AI in the first place because it is so essential to the daily lives of people. When AI has been incorporated into daily lives of people, such as the search engines that we have on Google, you're unable to act against it even if you want to, because it's such a detrimental part of you if you were to lose it. Okay, continue on with the point. The same thing happens with AI. No, there's no way to hold accountable because the general public doesn't know about a lot of these patents, right? Note this is especially impactful because consumers can't regulate it. They can't see the patents that are being kept hidden since none of the companies actually reveal these patents. But third of all, companies will need to specialize instead of innovate. E.g., Apple mainly sells phones and AirPods where they have the ability to research and innovate a lot more other things, right? That means there's no incentive to develop other forms of AI. A company has no incentive to specialize even if it's one huge conglomerate. This is because the profit margins for specializing are drastically lower than compared to the profit margins of pouring money into a single profitable invention. Look at the case of Dyson. When it started off manufacturing lights, heaters, stoves, and even a slew of other electronics, but as they co-opted other corporations to become the larger conglomerate it is today, it essentially only sells the same things that it did like 50 years ago. What are the impacts of this? The impacts are simple. First of all, on price gouging, insofar as there's only one source that you can go to for essential technology, the company has a maximum ability to price gouge as much as possible. But second of all, it slows innovation. And I want to give you an illustration to see how impactful this is. This looks like the loss of technology such as learning tools for disabled children. This could have immediately improved a lot of people's livelihoods. However, on our side of the comparative, we have none of that. So proud to propose.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now hear from second prop.
Hi, can you see and hear me?
Yeah, you're all good.
Great, thanks. QR's verbally, please. There are two questions in this debate. First, on ability. Second, on incentive. First, on ability. At the top of this clash I want to make our strategy exceedingly clear. Ability is a path to victory. And the reason why this is more important is because, as Alina explains to you, ability is by far the most significant limiting factor on what companies can and cannot do. This is because she explains to Response that they genuinely require mammoth amounts of data and resources for quality, for innovation, and for further cost savings. She explains to you the process of how ChatGPT and large language models, for instance, were formed. Comparatively, therefore, on both sides' best cases, they have an absolute ceiling on how much they can lower price or undertake innovation. So even if they have better incentives, that ceiling stops them from getting there. But on both sides' worst cases, on our side, we at the very least have a baseline incentive to innovate to draw more consumers in general, because it's a relatively nascent industry and consumers can always choose to stop using it if the price is too high or if innovation doesn't happen. So this is a strategy they need to take out in this debate. But let's engage with them on their best. On ability, what do we say on this? 3 things. First, on quality, because you could concentrate resources and data to better your systems. Second, they could take innovative risks. Third, on cross-subsidization. Of all 3 mechanisms, first speaker chooses to give one response to innovative risks. And her response is very simplistic. She says, no, the cost is very low. You just need one team of researchers. First of all, this doesn't engage with what Alina actually tells you. It's not just about how many researchers you have, right? If you're trying to make a large language model, like for instance, how Google is a search engine that requires huge amounts of data, for ChatGPT, they need to refine the data based on collecting user data, for instance, to refine that experience, which is why even after GPT-3 was released, it took months and years for them to collect more data for GPT-4 to be better. So this is their own response. It doesn't actually respond. The next thing they say then is that innovation is better on their side because they get more specialization. This is not true. And their examples themselves defeat this point because Google and Apple do actually specialize. For instance, Google has other services like Maps and Google Earth. The reason why this is the case is because they have the ability to undertake diversification. Because guess what? They have the resources to be able to break into other monopolies, for instance, that require high startup costs, and they have the resources to want to undertake risky investments that smaller companies will not otherwise undertake because they don't have much money to fall back on. So this is out of the debate. In fact, we are genuinely better able to diversify. But the incentive for companies to diversify is quite simple, that they want to capture more profit in other sectors. Because if you just do one thing, that limits the amount of profit that you can get, right? You can only make profit from the one avenue, whereas on our side, we get more profit avenues. So on both ability and incentive, this one is out of this debate. They didn't say poor incentive means you make innovation that isn't actually significant. First of all, this is not true. If it makes consumer happy, we're perfectly fine with that. But if it doesn't make consumer happy, then there'll be genuine pressure on companies to be better. If not, because it's not a necessity, they can easily opt out. And even if consumers couldn't opt out, generally companies want to listen to it because the more they do it, the more consumers use them because it's a very nascent technology. So on both, this is out of this debate. What then do they need to respond to? First, on quality. Alina gives you 3 mechanisms for this. Second, on price, because we have cost savings on our side, we're better able to lower the cost by spreading out the cost over a higher degree of output. So they need to respond to 3 mechanisms by the next speaker. Next, on incentive. And their point here is on competition. But I want to question the level, first of all, to which competition actually exists on their side. Because listen to what the first speaker says. They say, all they need to defend is anything above one company. The first thing to point out here is that obviously if it's only 2 or 3 companies, oligopolies exist. And this is where specialization occurs. Because on their side, oligopolies exist to avoid competition. They're more likely to specialize in their own individualized area and not infringe on each other because they don't want to actually compete. But even if they do compete, they compete in a collusive way. Like for instance, colluding to raise higher prices because that's beneficial for every single person in that oligopoly. So to be clear, if this is what they want to commit to defending, it does not win them the debate. So if the model is one oligopoly, it's why we better. The reason why is because we don't spread the resources very thin across multiple companies that don't have to split all the profits in this sector. So on ability, we win because on incentive, they absolutely lose if it's about oligopolies and just a few companies. But let's take them at the best. Say they do have competition. Why then do they still lose? Because on their side, they can't lower the price. We explained to you why there's an incentive to lower price on our side. The reason why is because demand is not actually inelastic. Consumers can opt out because this is not a necessity. Whereas on their side, they have absolutely no ability to lower price. But even if there is competition, let's take them on the best grounds. On regulation, the first thing and only thing they say here is that there's lobbying power on their side, on our side. This is actually functionally the same because even if there are multiple companies within the industry of AI, the entire industry and all of these companies have the same incentive to lobby governments for more lax regulations. The reason why is because it benefits all of them to be able to do whatever they want. So the amount of lobbying they get is actually exactly the same on their side because the entire industry lobbies together. This is the reason why, for instance, even though fossils have multiple companies, there's still a very strong lobby. But second of all, I'll flip regulation meta argument and flag you when I get there. Third, this shows you that regulation is more incumbent on the government So the incentive exists regardless. It's a government incentive. We how you get better government incentives regularly on our side. Because if there's a monopoly, there's a high degree of scrutiny because it naturally sets off alarm bells. Their response is that voters can't vote because they don't know what's happening. This is absolutely not true. This is the reason why we have politicians, for instance, and technocrats to do what we don't know. Generally, what voters need is just an awareness that this is an issue and to push governments rather, to do the specifics and figure out the specifics of the policies. So this is out of this debate. Their assumption, therefore, is that AI is absolutely essential. This is a premise that is unproven and it is not true. If I can take this out, their case false. The reason why AI is not essential is because they can't give you a single coded example of it being essential. This is necessary to help disabled children. Really, AI, that's the internet. That's not AI, guys. So unless they give me a genuine example, regulation is out of this debate and it falls to us. Next is their privacy and security risks. This is not really winning for them, right? Because this is not about monopolies. This is just generally about whether or not innovation exists in only one country as opposed to existing in multiple countries. So they need to prove to us why they get innovation in other countries. For instance, poorer countries like the majority of Southeast Asia, which I don't think is something they can prove either. So this pseudo principle is out of this debate because it is still contingent on the harm practically of hurting people. Unless they can prove that out of this debate. So at the end of this, therefore, what I've proven is that regulation is out, incentive is out. They need to genuinely engage on their mechanisms of ability. Third argument then on regulation. And this I want to point out is where I take them at their absolute best and clash them continuously. The premise here is that regulation is more possible on our side for 4 structural reasons. The first is actually easier to investigate because in many cases, when poor users of AI misuse surface on the internet, it's very difficult to determine it and trace it back to one specific company. On our side, it's easier to investigate because you know exactly who's perpetrating this thing. Second, it's easier to impose legal liability because you know exactly who to hold accountable and exactly who to bring to court or go to Congress hearings with. Third of all, it is easier to impose laws on the one specific company because you don't need to incur huge enforcement costs, for instance, of going to multiple companies and investigating them each one by one to make sure they're complying with your regulations. Fourth of all, if it is a monopoly, then you increase the amount of scrutiny that you have. This is the reason why, for instance, utilities tend to be regulated even though they are naturally absolute monopolies. The reason why is because people tend to be more aware of the fact that they're monopolies and therefore scrutinize them a bit more because they're fearful of monopolies doing all the things they talk about, like, for instance, raising prices, lowering quality, and things as such. The impact of that argument, strategically, it takes them at the best. But more importantly, we get easier regulation on our side. So there's high ability for regulation and there's high incentive for regulation. What then is our strategy for winning this debate? First, on quality, we point to that they have very little and to no ability to encourage and to actually undertake higher quality. This is an absolute limiting factor on their side. Second, on price, we observed you that demand is not inelastic, even if it is a monopoly. So you can't price set. So ability then is a greater limiting factor when it comes to price. Third, on innovation, they need to explain to us why innovation happens in genuinely good ways. We explain to you that the first mover advantage means a lack of due diligence on their side. It means bad innovation that is actually harmful. So there's no ability and bad innovation and poor incentives. We have incentives because companies can absolutely price set in many instances. So this debate was about which is the greater limiting factor, incentive or ability. They need to answer that question. We say it's ability. For all those reasons, I'm very, very proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much. And we'll now hear from second up.
Okay, share pronouns and verbal POIs, please. My time will begin in 3, 2, 1. On our side of the house, companies have an active incentive to continually innovate to make consumers pick their platform instead of other people's platform. So what matters on our side of the house is not that you have a few oligopolies. Maybe this is true, but at the same time, at least these few companies still have an incentive to outcompete each other, and that is how we actually fulfill constant innovation and constant improvement of quality. On that basis, I'm very proud to oppose. There are 2 things in this speech then. First, I'm going to do some refutation in the form of themes and questions, and then secondly, I'm going to go into our third argument. First theme I want to address then, innovation and quality. The first thing to note about the prop cases, they tell us up here that one big company has more of an ability to invest in new projects and improve quality. Right off the bat, I want to flag that there are 2 things that prop needs to prove in order for their argument to be true. Firstly, why these companies have an incentive to innovate, and secondly, why this innovation is only possible with a massive amount of capital. So firstly, do companies have an incentive to innovate? Prop wants to argue here that ability comes prior to incentive, but that's just untrue. I think incentive just comes logically prior to ability because it doesn't matter if you have the ability or capacity to innovate if you don't actually want to. So as long as we're able to win on incentive, I think we beat out ability as well. So what did we tell you on why companies don't have an incentive to innovate? We told you, monopolies are just less likely to push for innovation because companies inherently have a profit incentive. They want to make the most amount of money with the least amount of investment. And they're going to do this even if it means that they only sell one product or that this product is not to the fullest quality. So for example, Nestle has been making the same type of coffee for the last like 10 years because they have a monopoly over heated coffee, right? All of these examples in our real world go to suggest that companies don't actually go branch out in as many ways as they can if they are a monopoly. What do they say in response then? They say on our side of the house, they're oligopolies or whatever, and that they don't compete in a bad way. Two main responses. Firstly, this is not true. I think tech companies are oligopolies today. For example, Huawei, Samsung, and Apple, but still, each of them are still giants and they still have an incentive to compete against each other. But secondly, note exclusively then, these sectors are still innovating because these products are easily replaceable with each or the other. They're still in direct competition with one another. So even when they tell us that, for example, things like the first mover advantage exists, where you just put out bad products, they still have a strong incentive to actually improve them. And note this is exclusively true in AI. Because information. As soon as you put out a product, you have an incentive to make new platforms, right? So for example, ChatGPT making 5.0 or 3.0, things like that. Just because you want to put it out first does not mean that the quality does not increase with time. And also note that the very functions of these products often replace each other. The companies on our side of the house must compete against each other for that reason. Second question under this theme then, how much capital do you need in order to sufficiently innovate? They say you need a lot of people and resources to refine and renew data. It's not just about having a team of programmers. Okay, the importance of our response in first then is not that it takes a team of programmers, but the fact that it doesn't take nearly as much capital as Proposition tries to make it. The reason why this is important then is that sure, maybe it's a very time-inducing process and it's a very extensive process. But just because of the fact that it takes longer doesn't mean that companies on our side of the house are unable to access that. I think companies on our side of the house are still able to pursue many different projects at the same time, simply because there are a lot of companies and because it doesn't take nearly as much effort as they try to say. Okay, but last thing under this theme, even if we lose innovation and even if we lose the clash of creation, why do we still win this debate then? Note here that AIs have a threshold of usefulness. They're good for research, for calculation, for talking, etc. And we told you that we still have the ability to make the fundamental tools on our side of the house as well. So even if we lose innovation, the difference of treatments that consumers face are very limited. The clash is that in our worst case is just a wash. Before I move on to the second theme, then I'll take a quick POI.
Your premise is that AI is necessary so consumers cannot move away if it is bad. Simultaneously, you say, actually, AI is not that necessary and it doesn't do that many good things. Which is it?
No, we never said that AI doesn't do good things. Look, the reason why consumers are much dependent on AI is just by looking at our real world right now. Firstly, who are consumers? They're not just ordinary people, but they're also governments. So the amount of governments that actually use AI to determine whether someone can actually take out a loan or policies that they should make is increasing in numbers, right? So for a lot of governments, it's literally like they physically need this AI. But secondly, if you look at ChatGPT, the amount of users are rising exponentially every single day. But also note that this is a this house prefers world. So in the future, I think it's presumable that AI is just going to become much more prominent in our daily lives, maybe with a new feature that we can't even conceptualize yet. I think it's very clear that AI is going to be very prominent, not only now, but also in the future. Okay, second theme then. This theme is just going to quickly touch on regulation and deal with the third argument. What is the third argument? They tell us that regulation is more possible on their side. You increase the amount of scrutiny and that's a good thing. Two things I want to point out here. First, why you don't get scrutiny, and secondly, why this doesn't actually equal a capacity to act. First, people are actually likely to scrutinize monopolies less because they command greater levels of trust and respect. But secondly, note, they need to prove why people actually have enough capacity to act and prove why the scrutiny is going to lead to things like, for example, accountability. Even if you want to scrutinize a monopoly, a lot of the times accountability doesn't result as fast because you don't have a greater incentive to change, right? Whereas if you as a monopoly know that people can abandon your platform and you have a huge loss in profit, you have more of an incentive to actually respond to the scrutiny. But also, if they want to argue regulation, that's actually worse for them. More government regulation presumably means that you have more barriers and restrictions, and that's why you can actually have less innovation on their side of the house. Final theme of privacy and monopolization. Here, I just want to bring back the impacts of our case. Why was our case so important in the first place? The reason why our first argument was the most important argument in this round is because of the impacts that we gave you that went largely unresponded to. First, we told you why this results in a breach of national security, right? This is really, really important because the influence of AI is enough for it to seek into different parts of a program, right? but also we told you why we allow companies to get away with violations of law and morality. Even if it's the case that they're able to get more innovation on their side of the house, I think you should care about things such as, for example, whether a company is actually corrupt or not, or things such as like whether this company is being ethical a lot more, right? We care about these things as a society. This is why we crack down and boycott companies who have unethical practices. I think this should come prior to innovation. Okay, third argument then on why you get more bias in AI. Characterization. A lot of bias in AI is actually because of programmers. AI judgment is formed from the data collection in this training stage, and this is why you get a lot of errors in AI. Why does this get worse on proposition then? Note, if you have one big company, structure, it's likely that you're probably working like with under the same scope, right? So this looks like, presumably you belong to one country, right? Your company is close enough in order to actually cooperate. This is bad because this means that you'll have a huge centralized bias, right? This company who produces basically all of the AI is going to have all of the bias, very centralized, and I think that is bad. Why is our side comparatively better then? I think on our side of the house, different companies at the very least, even if they're not based in different countries, they have different power structures, right? So maybe some companies come from just a team of programmers, whereas others buy a team, and for example, and then they're then able to innovate. I think these structures are important in understanding the way that these different forms of AI program, right? I think because of the fact that you come from different power structures, at least the bias is not only from one group of people, right? Whereas on their side of the house, the bias is more centralized and obviously tilted towards one group of people. The impact of this argument is that, look, AI plays a huge role in people's lives and is likely to become even more prevalent in the future. The illustration here is like society's perception on the importance of racism or the bias that people harbor. AI has a great influence on it, and even if it gets worse on their side of the house, at the cost of innovation, we don't think it's worth it. On that basis, so proud to stand on opposition. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that fine speech. And we'll now hear from third prop.
Hi, can I be seen and heard?
All good.
Great. I think they give a very flippant response in second opposition on why incentive is more important than ability, because they tell you it's logically prior to, unfortunately, it doesn't respond to the majority of our case and our strategy. Our strategy was very clear that incentive may be logically prior to ability, but ability was a far greater limiting factor due to the increase of resources and concentration of resources that you need. We proved to you, and as I'll continue to prove to you down the bench, that even if we have a decreased incentive, there is still incentive to innovate because of things like profit maximization, but we get far greater ability to do so. So at the end of this debate, they still haven't answered the core question of where they get the ability to innovate, where they get the ability for regulation. It's for those reasons the motion stands. I want to ask two questions in this speech. One, how do companies act on our side? Second, on innovation. But before that, two miscellaneous pieces of rebuttal that I want out of this debate. First, on their third argument of AI biases. First, the premise of their argument is that it comes from programmers. This isn't true. AI biases come from things like the data that these AI get. On our side, it's far easier to remove erroneous data because you have one algorithm to look at rather than many different companies. On their side, if there are AI biases, you have so many different companies to look at, it's hard to change the algorithm. But second, if it's about programmers and researchers, guess what? We have more researchers working on these things that can cancel out the AI biases. This is an argument that's superficial. Second thing I want to cancel out, their first speaker push on how on our side, one government has information to all of the people in the world. One, this is uncomparative because on their side of the house, most AI companies come from the US anyways, so if this be true, it was symmetric. Second, at the very best, you have things on their side, you have competition from US and China. And here's why I do a bit of weighing. It is better for the US for only the US to have this information, because if China gets this information because they have the ability to create AI companies, then it's bad because they are a surveillance state. They can have far more pernicious incentives. So it's not true that on their side they have companies from US, China, Vietnam, and all of the developing states. They haven't proved why these countries have the ability to create AI companies that can compete with the US and China. Because of this, their argument doesn't stand. Now that these two pieces of rebuttal of the way, first question on how will companies act? And I think the premise of the case here is that demand is inelastic. And here's why I want to take it down because their rhetoric is that it's becoming more relevant and is integrated into technology. But their second shrinks into saying that technology actually isn't that important when trying to weigh innovation. The reason why this isn't true is a few things. One, AI technology is nascent, which means that people don't rely on it. Second, people haven't changed their way of lives. I think a way that our everyday lives don't rely on AI right now as a simple intuition pump. So it's unclear to me why people rely on it as much. What this means then is that demand isn't inelastic. So if companies engage in pernicious practices like price gouging, then people simply won't use the AI. Therefore, we think companies do have an incentive to price gouge. But I engage on this further later. But I want to know what this responds to. This responds to three of their claims. One, that boycotts don't work. Second, that price gouge is happening. And third, that regulations don't work. The fact that last statement, thank you, responds to all of these claims, it is out of the debate. Let's then move into specific refutation. First, on prices, what they don't respond to is Alina's argumentation. We told you two mechanisms of why prices are better on our side of the house. One, because you have an incentive to decrease prices to make sure more people get on this AI technology. And second, as more data gets fed into this AI technology, what this means then is that the technology and algorithms become far more efficient, and therefore you are able to decrease the operational costs. Therefore, the AI company on our side of the house has an increased incentive to decrease the prices to make sure that more people use it to expand their database. What it means then is that there's still equal incentive to decrease prices, so it's unclear to me why price gouging will happen, considering the fact that AI companies use consumer base as the method to get more data, whether that AI is far more efficient. No, thank you. Here's a weighing at the end of this price clash. The weighing is that ability is far more important in reducing price because we have things like cross-subsidization, which both of their speakers don't respond to. What this means is that we're able to use different AI technology to supplement each other. We make it far more cheaper for consumers, we make it higher for innovation. So on incentive, we win because we wash it out. On ability, it's far better because we can able to do things like cross-subsidization. The next thing on regulation. I want to note here, they don't respond to how things response or how lobbying power is symmetric because on their side of the house, the entire industry has the same lobbying power. But here's why I want to flip this argument. I think on our side of the house, lobbying power is far stronger because when you have a single AI technology, the voters still view this AI technology and company as potentially dangerous, and therefore I'd like to lobby governments and lobby politicians to try to make sure these AI companies are well regulated. So there's a flip to that argument. But what they don't respond to is more structural reasons. So thank you, of why regulation is more likely to happen on our side of the house. Their only response is to say that just because there's more scrutiny doesn't mean there's more regulation. Sure, that may be true, but it doesn't respond to the other things, like how it's easier to investigate and how there's legal liability is far more easier because there's only one company. And here's where to impact this argument. Because if it's true that AI companies act in pernicious ways on our side of the house, we completely sidestep this clash. Because on our side of the house, the governments can enact laws far easier and can investigate these companies because there's only one central company to investigate rather than the 50 different companies on their side of the house. So on our side, we sidestep the clash of pernicious incentives because regulation is far better. This is a flip to their argument. Second clash then on innovation. Before I go on, sure.
Individuals are lazy and the overtime window of comfort changes over time. For example, people 50 years ago thought phones were replaceable, but now they're literally inelastic.
Yeah, but I don't think how this responds to our argument. Our argument is that even though people are lazy, they still view AI as a potential threat, therefore are still likely to lobby governments and politicians. Your POI doesn't cut it. Second clash then on innovation. And I think the core question of this clash is whether you need a lot of resources for innovation. Our answer was yes. And now they know they have a shrinking case. Because in first, they said you just need a team of programmers. By second, they realized how ludicrous this claim actually sounds. So they said, oh, no, we just need more time. But this isn't true. So I want to actually illustrate what it means to have resources and to build an AI company. What you need to do is to build infrastructure, to create data servers and data mining. What you need is to spend huge amounts of money into this AI because it's such a nascent industry. Look how, for instance, Google pumped $10 billion into ChatGPT and OpenAI before it finally succeeded. $10 billion. There was losses the years after years after years before it finally succeeded at Open. What this meant then is that you need huge amounts of resources because it's a risky endeavor that can only happen on our side of the house. And the next thing I want to respond to then is on their claim that incentive comes prior to ability. But even on the profit incentive, I think we win because we prove to you that we're able to develop the products to the fullest quality. And here's one to flip the argument. Even if it's true that they like to have slower innovation on our side of the house, this is a good thing because we've shown you that on their side of the house, they have bad innovation because they don't conduct their own due diligence. They say, well, there's huge media attention and scrutiny, therefore they're unlikely to commit things that are bad for consumers. That wasn't our point. Our point is that companies are more likely to take a gamble because they want the first mover advantage. On our side, innovations like to be good because companies take their time, they don't take this gamble, and therefore like to innovate in far better at good ways. I want to weigh this then against their argument on cosmetic innovation. So maybe it is true on our worst case that there is cosmetic innovation that doesn't really help individuals on our side at the worst. Compare that to their side, where they have innovation that's risky, there's a gamble that could potentially hurt individuals. For instance, AI companies not properly regulating against pornography or deepfake. That's the harm that their side needs to address that their side hasn't done so currently. What then did they need to defend? Their side needed to defend oligopolies. I don't know the language of second speaker, because second speaker basically considered that oligopolies will exist. And here's what is detrimental for the case. Because if oligopolies do exist, then there's no competition, only collusion on their side of the house. And here's why this is an exclusive hub. Because even if on our side we don't have competition, we have a concentration of resources that can win the clash on innovation and can create better products. On their side, companies collude to specialize, but they don't have this concentration of resources to create new products. On our side of the house, the AI company is like to do this because then they can tap into untapped markets, they can potentially gain more profits into tapping into other products that aren't currently benefited from AI. It is for this reason our strategy is very clear. Ability was a limiting factor. It was for this reason we stood on proposition. We're very proud.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much for that speech. And we will now hear from third op.
All right, awesome. So POIs can just be given, verbally. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. The role of this proposition team was never to defend a certain slim scenarios in which AI is good or bad. They needed to defend a scenario in which there was only one corporation, and this corporation would be good, and that it would be much better than anything we could have to offer. It is because of their inability to do that they were so proud to oppose. I'm going to do 2 things in this debate. Firstly, analyze the theme of accountability, and secondly, discuss briefly on innovation and why we are still ahead in all regards for that. Firstly, on accountability. The first outcome I want to prove under this is that accountability is still largely better on our side, both in terms of lobbying and also government power. We said, very simply, that when you have a large number of corporations that are smaller and less powerful, it is not only easier to control and regulate, it is also far more likely for people to want to regulate and control them. Prop says 3 main things in constructed. The first thing that says is that people can still lobby and vote against AI corruption. I want to give 3 responses as to why this is untrue. The first and the simplest response is that this argument is negligent of Kathy's points. She already give you clear analysis on why it is significantly harder, if not impossible, to hold large conglomerates accountable in the first place, and when you have a large monopoly that controls an entirely new industry, it becomes so much more hard. The response we get is to say, oh, but these politicians are still beholden to voters for a job, and right after that they say AI is also not a necessary product for the consumers. So the question is very clear. Either AI is necessary to the point at which these voters care so much that they want to vote politicians out of office for not addressing AI properly, or it is not an important product, which undermines their own analysis, and they say that later on in their case. But also, they also say governments care a lot about AI. Governments, true, care a lot about AI, but the care in which they have is for the innovation of it. They want to engage with it, and they want to engage with the new investments because they think it'll have benefits to them and their nations in the future. So I am unclear as to why they'll knock out the only AI corporation that exists in the world if it is the case that it might benefit them in the future. Our side, then, is far better. Firstly, corporations are much easier to be held accountable. Not only are they smaller and less powerful, like Kathy points out to you, there also is a larger consumer incentive to hold them accountable. Consumers can simply leave. Lobbying and picket lines doesn't do much for a large million-dollar corporation, but literally moving away from the products and not giving them the investment money they need to survive is a huge incentive for them to be better. But also, when you are in a highly competitive market as one company out of hundreds that consumers can choose from, you have a far greater incentive to preserve your image. When you are the only corporation, your image doesn't matter because people who want to buy a product or access a product have to go to you. When you are one of hundreds of other companies, your image is the only reason people go to you in the first place. And if you tarnish that image by being a corrupt corporation, you are out of the market immediately. On our side, corruption is still better. This simple analysis hasn't been dealt with and will not, and it is far too late in proper apply to deal with this. The second thing they say is that AI is not necessary as a product. I already addressed this briefly, but I want to prove to you distinctly why AI is largely necessary and why that is better for our side. The reason why AI is necessary is because it is far in the potential. And Hannah says this when they POI about it. Oftentimes, necessary products are determined in the present. It is as it goes on that it becomes more necessary. But also, on their side of the house, when there is one corporation who dedicates its entire existence to the creation and development of AI, it is far more likely for them to market and advertise their product as necessary in the first place. Let's then weigh. On feasibility, we are far ahead. Perhaps they can have some degree of lobbying and scrutiny, but they don't attack the roots of the incentives corporations have. We give you the feasible reason for a corporation's care. They don't
don't care because of lobbying or words spoken to them or emails sent to them or picket lines. They care about the money and the profit, and that profit is only gained on our side because when you are a bad corporation, people have other options. On their side, when they are the only choice and they are the only option, it is impossible to hold them accountable because you cannot deal with their capital and income flow in the first place. The second outcome I want to prove is how we still get fairer pricing and greater accessibility for AI technology. Prop says a few things. The first thing to say is that corporations will want to charge fairly to maximize the number of individuals who engage with their product. And at the surface, it seems like a very fair point. But there are 4 key responses as to why corporations will still price unfairly. The first and the most intuitive piece of framing I gave to you is that corporations are naturally greedy because they answer to a web of investors. They only exist because of money, and their only job in the world is to create more money and opportunities to earn money. Their few responses they give is, but they still care about maximizing money by making fair prices for users. But why then would users care about fair prices if it is the only price they can access? If I go to the superstore to buy a product and I only have one choice for the product, it doesn't matter if it is $1 or $5 or $10. Insofar as I need it and I can afford it, I will purchase it. That incentive analysis was never dealt with from proposition. But secondly, large monopolies still maintain a certain degree of trust within the population. So even though people can rationally understand that Apple is overcharging them for their cell phones, they still trust that the product is worth it, and that is partly due to advertisement, but also due to the inherent trust corporations hold in our capitalistic society. And note, a large reason why people trust a company is because they see a lot of other people use it. So when I go on the street and see everybody I pass use a Samsung or an iPhone, I have no incentive to doubt the legitimacy of their pricing. I think it is a fair product that is good value and worth my money because all my friends and my family use it. When you have only one corporation provide AI and accessibility to AI, you will see everybody use the same product. You will think it is fair and rational for them to charge whatever price they charge, and because of that, you will want to charge, you will want to buy into it as well because you simply have no other options, and every other person you are exposed to uses the same exact product. And advertisements and messaging, like we told you before, only add to this. The advertisement of large conglomerates and large monopolies is always that their products are worth it, which is why Apple talks about a titanium casing to justify a 4-figure cost for a phone that only costs a few hundred to produce. Thirdly, they have no competition. And don't let prop bury this in a myriad of fluffy responses. The no competition thing is key. They will overcharge because they are able to overcharge and they have the incentive to overcharge. Hannah gave you the logical